Some roads are not meant to be found. They hide from maps and disappear from memory. This one was like that, a thin, dark line cutting through an endless forest. The trees formed a dark tunnel where even on the brightest day, sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy. It was a place forgotten by the sun, left to the quiet and the cold. A place that did not want to be disturbed. The road grew worse with every turn. I was a historian with a passion for forgotten places. I had heard a rumor about a village lost in this part of the country. The locals told me to turn back, that some things are best left buried. Their warnings only made me more curious. Why would an entire village just disappear? The official story was a fire, but the rumors spoke of something darker. I didn't believe in curses, I believed in facts. I was here to find the truth. The road finally ended. I could see the faint outlines of buildings. The air grew still, replaced by a silence that felt heavy and watchful. I was here. I had found it. The lost village of Blackwood Creek, and I was completely alone. The name itself was a mystery. Blackwood Creek. The woods were certainly black, their shadows deep and unwelcoming. I stepped out of the car and a chill ran down my spine. The silence pressed in. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a place that had long ago decided it wanted no visitors. I had prepared for this trip for weeks. I studied old maps, read faded newspaper clippings, and pieced together fragments of folklore. Blackwood Creek was a small, isolated logging community that thrived for a few decades. Then, one night, it fell silent. The first people to investigate found empty houses, tables set for dinner, with food still on the plates. But they found no people. Not a single soul. It was as if every man, woman, and child had simply vanished into thin air, leaving everything behind. The folklore offered a more terrifying answer. It spoke of whispers on the wind, of shadows that moved when no one was looking. It spoke of a presence that lived in the woods, an old thing that watched the village, swallowed by the forest and the darkness that ruled it. As I stood at the edge of the forgotten road, looking toward the silent structures, I felt a flicker of doubt. I took a deep breath, grabbed my backpack, and walked toward the village. My fascination with Blackwood Creek was personal. My great-grandfather, Thomas, was one of the last people to have any connection to the village. He was a traveling photographer. His journal was filled with haunting images. Tucked away in the back was a faded photograph of a young woman. On the back were the words, Alara, Blackwood Creek, I will come back for you. He never did. Every entry about Blackwood Creek stopped. On his deathbed, I asked him about the woman in the photograph. He gripped my hand, his eyes filled with terror. Some promises can't be kept, he whispered. Some places don't let you go. Don't ever go there. His words were a warning, but to me, they were a map. That promise was the real reason I was here. I wanted to understand what terror had silenced him. The church in the photograph was my destination. So, I stepped into the village. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay. As I took my first step into the abandoned street, I had the terrifying feeling I was not alone. The shadows were watching. I walked down what must have been the main street of Blackwood Creek. The silence was absolute. My footsteps, crunching on gravel and dry leaves, seemed an intrusion on a long and solemn quiet. The buildings stood like skeletal guards. Windows were dark, empty sockets. A cold wind snaked down the street, carrying the scent of pine needles, damp soil, and the unsettling smell of rot. I pulled my jacket tighter. It was a coldness that seeped into my bones, a feeling of profound isolation. A child's tricycle lay on its side, pointing toward the dark forest. Further down, a wooden sign for a general store swung from a single hinge, creaking rhythmically. I felt a growing sense of unease. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of waiting. I paused in the middle of the street and looked around. The village was nestled in a valley, surrounded by towering black trees. It felt like the village was being held captive, a prisoner of the ancient forest. I had a sudden, terrifying thought that the forest had already closed the path behind me. My main goal was to find the church from my great-grandfather's photograph. It was the only landmark I had. Based on the layout of similar small towns, the church would likely be at the center, or maybe on a small hill overlooking it. I scanned the rooftops, looking for a steeple, a cross, anything that would guide me. The buildings were all so similar, a collection of decaying wooden boxes. It was honestly hard to tell one from the other. Everything was covered in the same gray dust, the same creeping moss. It was a landscape of decay. I chose a house at random and peered through a grimy window. The glass was so clouded with dirt I could barely see inside. I wiped a patch clean with my sleeve and pressed my face against the cold surface. The interior was dark, filled with shadows that seemed to move. I could just make out the shape of a table and chairs in what must have been the kitchen. The table was set for a meal. It was exactly as the legends described. A scene of life, abruptly abandoned. The story was everywhere, written in the language of absence and decay. I felt like I was walking through a graveyard. I had to find that church. I couldn't just walk past these silent witnesses. I needed to see inside, to touch the past. I picked the house with the half-open door. The rusted hinge groaned as I pushed it wider. The air was stale, thick with dust and that same faint sweet scent. Stronger now, almost suffocating. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a small living area, a threadbare sofa, a cold stone fireplace, and faded photographs on the mantel. I shone my light on the photos. A family, frozen in time, stern father, gentle mother, 2 serious children. In the kitchen, a petrified loaf of bread sat beside a knife. A child's drawing clung to a cupboard, a stick figure family, a bright sun, and in the corner, a tall dark shape drawn in heavy black crayon. Suddenly, a soft thump from upstairs made me freeze. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. I held my breath, listening. Silence returned, deeper than before. Maybe it was just an animal, I told myself. But the sound felt deliberate. I stood in the dark kitchen, flashlight trembling, staring at the staircase leading up. The house felt alive, watching. I had to decide, go deeper or run. My logical mind said it was just the house settling, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The sound from upstairs was too precise. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, flashlight fixed on the darkness above. I should have left, but curiosity won. I climbed, each step creaking, the air growing colder, the sweet, rotten smell intensifying. Halfway up, I heard it, a whisper, soft and sibilant, almost human. I stopped, straining to listen. The whisper faded, replaced by oppressive silence. "Hello?" I called, my voice weak. Only my echo answered. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched before me, wallpaper peeling like decaying skin. The whispering returned, now a low murmur from the walls themselves, a chorus of sorrow and warning. I was not welcome here. I was a trespasser in a place of grief, and something was waking up. The house seemed to breathe around me. Every instinct screamed to leave. I turned and fled, heart pounding. The whispers followed me down the stairs. I burst out of the house into the cold, gray afternoon, gulping fresh air. I needed to focus, find the church. Scanning the village, I spotted a steeple on a distant hill, half hidden by trees. Relief and dread mingled. That was my destination. I walked, every house watching, their windows like eyes. The silence was thick, the village a living thing, trying to reject me. The church came into view, weathered wood, peeling paint, a leaning steeple, a graveyard beside it, headstones swallowed by weeds. This was the place from the photograph, the place that haunted my great-grandfather. I pushed open the creaking gate and stepped onto the haunted ground. The air felt heavier here, charged with old secrets. I approached the church door, heart pounding. Whatever waited inside, I had to face it. The church door swung open, revealing shadows, and the thick smell of old paper, dusty pews lined the nave. The altar was bare, except for a single, large book bound in cracked leather. It radiated cold energy. I approached, feeling reverence and dread. I opened the book, thick parchment pages, spidery handwriting, a journal, the first entry, nearly 150 years old, written by the village's first preacher. He wrote of hope, then fear the woods as a conscious shadow, a hunger that waits, livestock vanished, nightmares plagued the villagers' whispers, promised secrets. The final entries were frantic, a pact made by the founders, a promise to the shadow in the woods. The last line, it is awake, it walks among us. God, help our souls. The truth was clear. Blackwood Creek's prosperity was bought with a terrible bargain. The shadow had come to collect. I slammed the book, shut, dust swirling like ghosts. the silence in the church felt corrupted, heavy with doom. I realized I was now part of the story. Dread flooded me. The book was a confession, a record of a deal with something ancient and hungry. My great-grandfather had discovered this too. He hadn't just passed through, he'd stumbled into a nightmare. The shadow was real, and its patience had run out. I backed away from the altar, eyes on the heavy doors. Outside, the sun was setting, the light fading to deep purple. Shadows inside the church stretched and thickened, crawling up the walls. The temperature dropped, my breath fogged in the air. A low, vibrating hum filled the room, resonating in my chest. The church was no longer a sanctuary, it was a tomb. I was trapped with the village's sin. The shadow was waking, drawn by my presence. Panic set in. The doors looked less like an exit, more like a crypt. The darkness was gathering for me. Just as I turned to make a desperate run, a new sound cut through the low humming. It was a whisper, but it was different. This one was clear, singular, and heartbreakingly sad. It was the voice of a young woman, and it seemed to come from the altar behind me. He promised he would come back, the voice whispered, laced with a century of sorrow. He promised. My blood ran cold. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through, and pointed it back at the altar. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw her, a faint, shimmering outline of a figure, translucent and ethereal. She looked just like the woman in my great-grandfather's photograph. Her form was indistinct, like heat haze, but her eyes were clear, filled with ancient grief. It was Alara, the woman my great-grandfather had promised to return for. She was still here, a prisoner of this cursed place. Her ghostly form flickered and then vanished, but her voice remained. The shadow offered a choice: prosperity for a price, a soul for every tree that fell. We thought it was a metaphor, but the woods remember every debt. The villagers had made a deal with the entity, trading lives for wealth. They had sacrificed outsiders, lone travelers, anyone who wouldn't be missed, feeding the shadow to maintain their comfortable lives. Your great-grandfather saw the truth. He wanted me to leave with him, but I was afraid. I stayed. I promised. I would wait for him. And then the shadow came for everyone. It took us all in one night. It keeps us here. Our voices are the whispers you hear. Our sorrow is the cold you feel. The entire village was a ghost trapped in a loop of their final moments. As Alara's last words faded into the humming darkness, the church doors slammed shut. The last light vanished, plunging the church into blackness. My flashlight was a fragile circle in the dark. The humming grew into a guttural growl that vibrated through me. Panic seized me. I was locked in. The entity was here. I swung my flashlight, searching for the sound's source. Then, at the far end of the aisle, a patch of shadow was moving. A void in the shape of a tall, featureless man. It began to move toward me, gliding silently. The temperature plummeted, and frost formed. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. This was the entity that had consumed Blackwood Creek, the tall, dark figure from the child's drawing. It was a being of ancient hunger, focused entirely on me. I could only watch as it drifted closer, its form drinking the light from my flashlight. Faint whispers swirled around me. "It's the collector," Alara's voice echoed. The shape was 20 feet away, and I knew I was looking at the face of evil. As the towering shadow glided closer, its presence crushed the air around me, filling my mind with primal, suffocating terror. It felt ancient, a being that existed before thought, before light. My flashlight beam, my only shield, began to flicker violently, the light stuttering as if batteries were dying, though I knew they were brand new. The creature seemed to feed on the light, drawing it in, leaving me in intermittent flashes of darkness. In those brief moments of black, I felt it get closer, its chilling aura washing over me. It was toying with me, savoring my fear. I had to do something. My survival instinct finally broke through. I wasn't going to die here, another forgotten soul absorbed into this land. I thought of the preacher's book still lying on the altar behind me. It was the source of this, the record of the pact. Maybe the source of the curse was also its weakness. With a choked cry, I tore my gaze from the shadow, turned, and scrambled back toward the altar. My hands shook so badly I could barely function, fumbling for the heavy leather-bound journal. The shadow let out a low, angry hiss, a sound like 1,000 snakes, as I grabbed the book. The sound ripped through the air, and the temperature dropped so low that frost spread rapidly across the floor, crawling toward me. The creature's advance quickened. It no longer glided. It surged forward, a tidal wave of darkness intent on swallowing me whole. I ripped the book open, frantically flipping through brittle, yellowed pages. I didn't know what I was looking for, a counter-ritual, a name, a weakness. My fingers brushed against a page near the end, where the preacher's writing was barely legible. There, in a circle drawn with blood, was a single word. It was a name, ancient and strange. I didn't know what it meant, but the preacher had written a note. Its heart, its name. To speak it is to command it, to bind it, to blind it. It was a desperate gamble, the last prayer of a damned man. The shadow was almost upon me now, its form looming over the altar, its cold so intense it felt like fire. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I stared into the heart of the void and screamed the name from the page into the suffocating darkness. The name I screamed was not a word from any human language. It was a guttural, terrifying sound that tore at my throat. It felt foul, a word that should never be spoken. The moment the sound left my lips, the entire church convulsed. The shadow turned into an ear-splitting shriek of pure agony, of worlds being torn apart. The darkness recoiled violently as if struck by a blow. Faces, contorted in silent screams, appeared and vanished. They were the lost souls of Blackwood Creek, trapped within the entity. Alara's face was among them, urging me on. The creature was wounded, disoriented. The name was its anchor, and speaking it had exposed its core to the light. My flashlight suddenly blazed with a brilliant intensity. The name had given me a brief moment of control over the ancient evil. I knew this was my only chance. I clutched the heavy book to my chest. It was the weapon. I backed away from the altar. I had only bought myself a few seconds. The church doors had swung open again. Behind them lay the moonless night and the dark forest, but it was better than the certain death inside this cursed building. Without a second thought, I turned and ran. I sprinted down the aisle, my boots pounding on the stone floor. I could feel the shadow's presence behind me, chasing me. The whispers of the villagers swirled around me, frantic cries for help. I burst through the church doors and into the night. I ran blindly through the churchyard, the iron gate my only goal. The shadow was tearing its way out of the church. I reached the main street, a path of utter darkness. Panic told me to find the road and my car. My only hope was the light. The headlights. I ran toward the head of the street, where I had left my car. From every dark window, the whispers grew louder. It was the shadow, free from the church, and it was coming for me. I just ran, praying I would reach the car before the shadow caught up. My car, a faint glint at the end of the street, a symbol of a world I wasn't sure I could reach. The scraping, dragging noise behind me spoke of immense size. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers clumsy with cold and terror. The keys felt like the most important object. Each step was a monumental effort. A glance over my shoulder stole the air from my lungs. The shadow was no longer man-shaped. It had become something more monstrous, a flowing mass of pure blackness. It consumed everything, erasing the village as it advanced. I was next. The whispers became a constant, desperate scream. I reached the car. My shaking hands took 3 tries to get the key in. The click of the door was the most beautiful sound. I threw myself inside. Slamming the door, a futile gesture against the looming entity. The engine coughed and died. Despair washed over me. It was toying with me, snatching away hope. It was right outside. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. The car plunged into cold frost, obscuring the world. A final, desperate prayer. The engine roared to life. I slammed the gear stick into drive and flicked on the headlights. Beams of light sliced through the darkness, striking the shadow. A piercing shriek filled the air. The shadow recoiled from the intense light. The solid mass of darkness dissolved into a churning cloud of black smoke. I didn't wait to see what happened. I stomped on the accelerator. The tires screamed as they spun, struggling for traction. For a terrifying second, the car didn't move, held in place by the creature's will. The engine whined, straining against the force then. With a violent lurch, the car shot forward. Breaking free, I was driving through the dissipating form of the shadow itself, a vortex of cold and screaming whispers. I drove like a madman down the forgotten road, the car bouncing and jarring over the cratered asphalt. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare look in the mirror, terrified of what I might see. Was it following me? Was it reforming behind me? The dark, twisted trees on either side seemed to reach for the car, their branches like skeletal fingers trying to pull me back into the nightmare. The forest now felt alive, an extension of the shadows, will its ancient anger chasing me out. The preacher's book sat on the seat, its dark leather cover absorbing light from the dashboard. It felt like hours, but could only have been minutes before I saw it. The main highway. The sight of other headlights, cars moving at normal speeds, a world that didn't know about the horror in the woods, was like waking from a dream. I swerved onto the smooth pavement, tires screeching in protest, and merged into traffic. I was out. I had escaped. But as I drove, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-aching chill that the heater couldn't touch. The mystery wasn't solved. It was real. I had survived. But what had I unleashed by speaking that name? I am writing this a week later in a motel room miles away. The preacher's book is on the table. I haven't opened it again. I don't sleep much. When I do, I dream of a tall, dark shape watching from the corner. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I can still hear the whispers. They are fainter now, but they are there, Alara's voice asking if he'll return, the warnings from the villagers. And sometimes, a new whisper, a deep and guttural sound that promises it will find me. The road away from Blackwood Creek is long, but I have a terrible feeling that it doesn't have an end.